Come on, soldier. Show everybody what they taught you. The biker twisted Tom Mercer's faded field jacket, pulling the 44-year-old veteran forward until their faces were inches apart. Around them, a California streak fair had gone silent. Hundreds watched from every direction, but somehow nobody stepped in. Tom's right hand closed into a fist. For one dangerous second, the three bikers stopped smiling. Then Tom opened it again. Ray Danner laughed, and what happened next made the crowd realize they had mistaken restraint for weakness. Tom's military cap lay in the dust. One biker blocked his left side, another stood behind him, and Ray had discovered the one thing Tom seemed more afraid of losing than the fight itself. A folded envelope was slipping from his jacket. Tom caught it and pressed it against his chest. Ray noticed. "What's in there?" Ray reached for the envelope. Tom stepped back. "Leave that alone." A woman whispered for someone to call security, yet the circle widened. Everyone seemed to be waiting for somebody else to become brave first. Ray shoved Tom against a motorcycle. The envelope nearly fell again. Then, from the far side of the crowd, one man started walking forward. At first, almost nobody noticed him. He wore black. He wasn't large. He wasn't shouting. But as he passed between spectators, faces changed. A teenager stared. A photographer lowered his camera. Then, a martial arts student whispered two words: Bruce Lee. Bruce kept walking, but the real mystery wasn't what Bruce Lee was about to do. It was why a combat veteran who knew how to fight had refused to throw a punch. And what was inside the envelope, he was willing to take a beating to protect. To understand that, go back 40 minutes, before the crowd formed, before Ray threw the first shove, and before Bruce Lee had any reason to step forward at all. 40 minutes earlier, there had been no circle, no shouting, and no fists. The Southern California afternoon felt almost peaceful. Families moved between food stands and motorcycle displays while music played through temporary speakers. Veterans sold raffle tickets beneath a canvas awning. Children climbed onto park fire engines, and the smell of grilled hamburgers drifted across the crowded street. Tom Mercer arrived alone. At 44, he looked older. Years in uniform had left gray around his temples and stiffness in his right hand. Korea had come early in his career. Vietnam had come later. Now, civilian life had given him something neither war had prepared him for. Too much time to remember. At the veterans' booth, a woman recognized him. "Sarah coming today?" Tom touched the inside pocket of his field jacket. "If I can convince her." Inside was a folded envelope he had already read so many times, the creases were beginning to tear. He didn't explain further. Across the street, Bruce Lee stood near a small martial arts exhibition, speaking quietly with an acquaintance. He wasn't scheduled to perform. Most people hadn't noticed him yet. Bruce, however, had noticed three men near the motorcycle display. Ray Danner and his friends weren't fighting anyone. Not yet. They were simply loud enough that people moved when they approached. Ray seemed to enjoy that. Then Eddie, the youngest biker, backed a motorcycle away from the curb without looking. An 8-year-old boy wandered directly behind it. Tom moved first. He caught the boy by the shoulder and pulled him clear. "Watch behind you," Tom told Eddie. Ray turned. "He can watch himself." Tom looked at the frightened child, then back at Ray. "He's 8. Nothing more." But several people had heard it. Ray's smile tightened. Tom walked away without another glance. Bruce had seen the entire exchange. He also saw something Tom didn't. Ray wasn't angry because he'd been insulted. He was angry because he'd been corrected in front of people. Cole glanced at the ribbons pinned above Tom's jacket pocket. "Vietnam?" Ray watched the veteran disappear into the crowd. Then he smiled. "Maybe our hero wants to teach us something." The three bikers started after him, and from across the street, Bruce Lee quietly turned his head and watched them go. Tom had almost reached the far end of the motorcycle display when Ray's voice followed him. "Hey, soldier." Tom kept walking. Ray moved around him and blocked the path, while Cole appeared on his right and Eddie stopped several feet behind. People nearby sensed trouble before anyone raised a hand. Conversations faded. Heads turned. A loose circle began forming around four men who only seconds earlier had been strangers. Ray glanced at the ribbons on Tom's jacket. Vietnam? Tom said nothing. Ray stepped closer. You guys come home thinking everybody owes you something? Tom's expression barely changed. No, I'm just trying to go home. Ray stared at him for a moment, then stepped aside. Then go. For one brief second, it looked finished. Tom walked past him. Then Ray knocked the military cap from Tom's head. It landed in the dust. A few people gasped. Tom stopped. His shoulders tightened. His injured right hand curled slightly, and something old seemed to return to his eyes. Everyone expected him to turn around swinging. Instead, Tom bent down, picked up his cap, brushed away the dirt, and put it back on. Ray laughed. 3 civilians make you nervous? Tom looked directly at him. You don't. The smile disappeared from Ray's face. He shoved Tom hard in the chest. The crowd immediately moved backward. Another shove followed. Someone shouted, "Leave him alone!" But the voice came from safely behind 20 other people. Tom tried walking around Ray. Cole blocked him. When Eddie reluctantly closed the other side, Tom finally understood they weren't going to let him leave. Ray grabbed his jacket. Tom's body reacted before his mind did. One turn of the wrist, one shift of his feet, and suddenly Ray's arm was trapped. Tom had perfect position to put him on the pavement. From behind the spectators, Bruce Lee saw it. Then Tom released Ray. He lowered his hands. Bruce understood immediately. This veteran wasn't refusing to fight because he had forgotten how. He was making a choice not to. Ray saw only humiliation. His fist came without warning. Tom turned enough that the blow glanced across his cheek. Cole shoved him from behind, sending him against a parked motorcycle. People screamed, yet nobody crossed the circle. Then something white slipped from Tom's jacket. The envelope. Tom caught it instantly and pressed it against his chest. Ray noticed the sudden fear in his eyes. What's that? Leave it alone. Ray smiled and reached for it. Tom backed away. I said, leave it alone. Whatever was inside that envelope mattered more to the veteran than winning this fight. Ray reached again. Before his fingers touched it, a calm voice came from behind him. He told you to leave it alone. Ray slowly turned. The crowd began separating, and through the opening walked Bruce Lee. Bruce walked through the opening without hurrying. He didn't raise his fists or look at the hundreds of people watching. His attention went first to Tom. A red mark was forming across the veteran's cheek, but the envelope was still pressed tightly against his chest. Can you stand? Bruce asked. Tom nodded. Only then did Bruce turn toward the 3 bikers. Ray looked him up and down and almost laughed. Cole didn't. His face changed as recognition arrived. Ray, he muttered, that's Bruce Lee. A murmur traveled through the crowd. Ray heard it too, and suddenly walking away became harder. Too many people were watching. You putting on a show? He asked. Bruce shook his head. No, I'm trying to stop one. Bruce bent down, picked up Tom's cap, and handed it back to him. Tom took it with his weakened right hand. Bruce noticed the stiffness immediately. More importantly, he noticed how Tom kept positioning himself between Ray and the envelope. Don't make this worse, Tom said quietly. It was the last thing Bruce expected from the man who had just been attacked. For several seconds, nobody moved. Bruce gave Ray every opportunity to end it. This can finish here. Eddie looked relieved. He touched Ray's shoulder. Forget it. Let's go. Ray almost listened. Then his eyes returned to the envelope. Whatever Tom was protecting had become the one thing Ray still believed could restore his control over the crowd. He lunged for it. Bruce's hand caught Ray's wrist. There was no strike, no dramatic movement. Ray simply stopped. He pulled once, then harder, but Bruce's grip and position didn't change. The laughter around the bikers vanished. Bruce released him voluntarily. That was worse. Ray stared at his own wrist, realizing Bruce had just demonstrated control without needing to hurt him. "Walk away," Bruce said. Ray stepped backward. Eddie exhaled. Cole lowered his shoulders. Bruce turned toward Tom. Ray attacked from behind. The crowd shouted, but Bruce had already moved. He shifted aside, redirected Ray's momentum, and seconds later the larger man hit the pavement beside the motorcycle he had been standing near. Cole rushed forward almost instinctively. Bruce stopped his advance with one controlled counter that left Cole stumbling backward, stunned more than injured. Eddie remained where he was. Bruce looked at him. "You don't have to follow him." Eddie looked at Ray, then at the crowd. Slowly, he stepped away. Ray climbed back to his feet, humiliation burning across his face. His hand moved toward his motorcycle, as if reaching for something that could turn the confrontation into something far worse. "Ray!" The voice came from Tom. Ray froze. Tom held the envelope against his chest and stared at the man who had just attacked him. "Don't turn a stupid afternoon into the rest of your life." Even Bruce looked at Tom differently after that. Then something unexpected happened behind them. A gray-haired veteran stepped out of the crowd and stood beside Tom. A booth worker followed, then another man, then two more. Nobody raised a fist. Nobody threatened the bikers. They simply stopped backing away. Within seconds, Bruce was no longer the only person standing between Tom and the three men. Ray looked around and finally understood what had changed. Minutes earlier, every step he took had pushed the crowd backward. Now nobody moved. Security officers appeared at the far end of the street. The confrontation was over. Then Tom's knees suddenly buckled. Bruce caught him before he hit the pavement, but the envelope slipped from his fingers. It struck the ground and opened. A photograph slid into the sunlight. Beside it was a letter written in a young girl's handwriting. Bruce looked down, and the expression on his face changed. Bruce helped Tom sit against the side of a vendor's table while someone called for medical assistance. The crowd remained strangely quiet. The confrontation everyone had been watching was over, yet nobody seemed interested in leaving. On the pavement between Bruce and Tom lay the photograph that had fallen from the envelope. It showed a younger Tom in uniform beside a little girl with dark hair and a missing front tooth. Beneath it was a handwritten letter beginning with one word, "Dad." Tom reached for it, but his injured hand trembled. Bruce picked up the photograph and carefully returned it to him. "My daughter," Tom said. Her name was Sarah. When Tom had returned from Vietnam, he had expected home to feel familiar. Instead, he discovered that war had followed him back in quieter ways. He startled at sudden noises. He barely slept. Worse, anger came too quickly. During one argument, Sarah had looked at him with a kind of fear Tom had never forgotten. Eventually, she went to stay with relatives. The letter had arrived weeks later. Sarah wanted to see him again. Today was supposed to be their first real afternoon together since everything had fallen apart. Tom had carried her letter because he needed to remember the promise he had made himself. If his daughter gave him another chance, she would never again have to watch anger decide who her father became. Bruce looked toward Ray, then back at Tom. Suddenly, every moment made sense. The lowered fists, the insults ignored, even the blows Tom had refused to return. "I spent years learning when to fight," Tom said quietly. "Coming home, I had to learn when not to." Then the crowd shifted. A teenage girl stood near the veteran's booth. Tom saw her and went completely still. Sarah. Her eyes moved from the dirt on his jacket to the mark across his face, then toward the bikers being held by security. She slowly approached. "Dad, did you fight them?" Tom opened his mouth, but no answer came. Bruce spoke instead. "Your father fought very hard." Confused, Bruce glanced at Tom. Just not the way they wanted him to. Sarah's eyes filled. Then she noticed the worn envelope in her father's hand. "You kept my letter?" Tom looked down at it. Every word. She sat beside him and wrapped both arms around his shoulders. For the first time that afternoon, Tom stopped watching the bikers. Behind them, Ray had become silent. As security prepared to lead him away, he looked back at the veteran he had tried so desperately to provoke. "Why didn't you hit me?" Tom slowly raised his eyes, and this time he answered, "Because my daughter was coming." Tom's answer was so quiet that Ray almost missed it. Sarah remained beside her father, one arm around his shoulders. Tom looked at Ray without anger, and she'd already seen enough of that man. Ray frowned. Then he understood. Tom wasn't talking about him. He was talking about himself, the version of himself that had returned from Vietnam, carrying anger into a home where it didn't belong. For the first time all afternoon, Ray had nothing to say. Eddie lowered his eyes. Cole stared at the pavement. The crowd that had once watched Tom's restraint as weakness now understood what it had cost him. A photographer pushed closer and called Bruce's name, asking him to stand beside the bikers for a picture. Bruce refused. Another man asked how quickly he could have ended the fight. Bruce barely acknowledged the question. He looked instead toward Tom. Stopping a man from throwing a punch, Bruce seemed to understand, was easy compared with stopping yourself from throwing one when every person around you expected it. Sarah helped her father stand. Then something remarkable happened. The same crowd that had backed away from Tom minutes earlier opened a path for him. But this time, they weren't moving because they were frightened. They were making room out of respect. Tom and Sarah began walking through it together. Halfway across the street, Tom stopped and looked back. Bruce stood exactly where the confrontation had ended. Neither man said anything. They simply nodded. One had possessed the courage to step into violence. The other had possessed the discipline not to return it. As Tom disappeared into the crowd with his daughter, Bruce bent down and picked up one final sheet that had slipped unnoticed from the envelope. He wasn't trying to read it, but one handwritten sentence near the bottom caught his eye. A sentence that explained why Tom had protected that letter more fiercely than he had protected himself. Bruce looked down at the final sentence Sarah had written. "I don't need the father who left. I just want to know the father who came home." He carefully folded the page and caught up with Tom before he and Sarah reached the end of the street. No speech, no advice. Bruce simply handed it back. Tom understood. Hundreds of people had witnessed what happened that afternoon, but the moment they would remember wasn't simply Bruce Lee putting a biker on the pavement. It was everything that happened before and after it. 3 bikers had possessed power through intimidation. A packed crowd had possessed power through numbers. Bruce possessed the ability to end a fight. But Tom Mercer had possessed something harder to see: restraint. At the beginning, his fist had closed and then opened. Everyone watching had mistaken that for weakness. By the end, they understood it had been his first victory. Bruce stepping forward had been the second. And when ordinary people finally stopped backing away and stood beside him, that became the third. Maybe that is why courage matters most when someone has to be first. If you had been standing in that crowd, would you have stepped forward before Bruce Lee did? Tell us in the comments. And subscribe if you want more cinematic stories about legendary figures, courage, and the moments that reveal who people truly are. Because 3 bikers had tried to force a Vietnam veteran to prove he was still a fighter. By the time the crowd finally moved, everyone understood that he already had.